Hey, this is your provocateur, Andre. I'm going to tell you a quick story. I was once in Russia teaching a class, and I had students from all over Russia and from Central Asia. And one of the students that I had was a girl who spoke from the Caucasus Mountains, and she spoke the language Kabardinsk. And I was interested by that because I'd never really known much about the Kabardinsk people or really heard of that language before. There are so many little languages in Central Asia and the Caucasus of Russia. So I was intrigued, and in between classes I looked up the Kabardinsk people, and the Kabardinsk where we get the name for gabardine cloth, and where the Kabardinsk horses come from, the Kabardinsk people. And one of the little factoids that I read on Wikipedia about the Kabardinsk is that their language is related to the Basque language. Now, I'm not an expert on Kabardinia or the Kabardinsk people or whatever. I just knew what I read on Wikipedia. But as I was headed home from Russia, I was flying out of Frankfurt towards Chicago, and I sat next to this woman. And the woman and I got to talking, and she mentioned that she was a linguist. She mentioned that she had come. She didn't mention that she was a linguist. She mentioned that she had come from Spain. And I said, "What part of Spain did you come from?" She said, "I came from the Basque region of Spain." I said, "That's so interesting. Did you know that the Basque language is related to the Kabardinsk language?" And I began to talk to her very authoritatively as if I knew a whole bunch about the subject. And she actually started to look very agitated, and she started to look a bit annoyed. And I kind of wasn't sure, because why would anybody in the world have much of a feeling or an opinion about this obscure fact that the Kabardinsk language and the Basque language are related? Well, as a matter of fact, this woman was a linguist, and her specialty was the Basque language. And she had just delivered a dissertation that she'd been working on for a long time. She delivered her paper to a conference in the Basque region of Spain, establishing her evidence for the theory that Basque and Kabardinsk are not related. And so here I was, some guy that doesn't really know anything about the subject, authoritatively proclaiming to her that her whole theory was wrong. What a fool I must have looked like. But even worse, how frustrated she was that despite all of her work on the subject, one little entry in Wikipedia that anybody can just go in and write whatever they want can outweigh all of her work in the public mind. And that gave me an interesting thought, and it is this. Americans have this wonderful thing called democracy. And in democracy, each person gets one vote. We hear people say, "I have a right to my opinion." And everybody's vote is just as good as everybody else's. But the tragedy about this is that Americans, especially people on YouTube, think that their opinion is just as valid as everybody else's. And honestly, that's foolish. Just because you have an opinion, or just because you have the right to an opinion, doesn't make you right. Most of us really ought to shut up and listen, because most of us don't know. Most of us, the knowledge that we have is below average. That 50% of us at least. And especially considering that most people have a narrow range of expertise and knowledge. And so if we're coming across somebody who has studied, who knows, who has perhaps a greater intellect than we do, most of us ought to listen rather than run our mouths. But it amazes me how many of us think that our opinions are somehow sacrosanct, somehow important, especially today, because the more we have access to flippant information, the less we need to rely on intelligence, wisdom, thought, a holistic understanding of subjects. And the result of this is that there are all kinds of people today believing all kinds of baloney without really having thought it through, without really gathering the information, without having coherent arguments. But we have become so practiced and so trained at defending our worthless ideas, at defending our easily come after information or opinions that and that we believe that our opinions are somehow equally valid to everybody else's just because we hold them. What foolishness. It's time for us to think more and listen more and talk less. Now, I say that as somebody expressing a variety of views on YouTube, but I believe that we all ought to realize that the wisest thing that sometimes you can ever say is, I don't know. I don't know. As soon as we can come to a point of I don't know, then that allows us to open our minds to listen and to start thinking about what the truth might be. And even after we've gathered a lot of information, I don't know, is still important. It's one of the wisest things we can ever say. Andre, you're provocateur.